might call it a football disaster. Because the Chelsea must be always in the top, as they were used to, and even better than that, always fighting for silverware.
Chelsea finally confirmed this week that Antonio Conte will take charge of the team after Euro 2016.
Results from Eden Hazard's scans have revealed that he'll be out for 6 months, with Chelsea already struggling. Many are questioning if Conte's the man to help them get out of this mess.
I'm focused about my work, I'm focused to improve the team.
We are receiving word tonight that Conte has been sacked as Chelsea manager, and the leadership at the club have named Bielsa as his successor. With 23 points in 24 games, the main aim surely this year simply has to be to avoid relegation.
With no change in form since Bielsa's appointment, anything but a win against Manchester United today will seal their fate with 4 matches to spare.
Just over Rooney, Diego Costa produces it, and Chelsea's persistence has paid off here, and still more time.
Relegation has been confirmed following a 1-1 draw at Stamford Bridge. Massive questions surely have to be asked of the squad, manager and the owners as to how this could possibly happen. This may very well be the end of an era at Chelsea Football Club.
What is going on, guys? Jack here, and welcome to episode 1 of Rebuilding Chelsea here in Football Manager 2017, and hopefully you enjoyed the intro. I did put a little bit of work into it just to set the scene, I guess, for what this series will entail. Of course, this is going to be a continuation of my Tottenham Hotspur save. However, during the off-season after our first year in charge, I resigned as manager, and as you can see in the background, I applied for the Chelsea job, and well, we were successful in getting it, which was absolutely fantastic. So if you didn't quite follow along with the story of the intro, the bottom line is Chelsea have been relegated from the Premier League. They finished 18th in the end, and they're going to be playing in the Championship next year. As a result, they got through 2 managers in Conte and Bielsa, and well, it's going to be up to me to, I guess, stamp my authority over this team, hopefully kind of help the club, I guess, over this transitional period, and really revamp the squad with a fresh lick of paint. And well, there's going to be a few challenges, I guess, to face in the first summer in charge in terms of the squad. So I guess one of my first challenges really is to analyse what exactly went wrong with this season. Why did the club end up finishing 18th? And look to kind of build off that. In terms of my long-term goals for the save, it's very much going to be about getting Chelsea back to the Premier League and top kind of dog, I guess, in England, getting them to win the Premier League, hopefully win a Champions League too. But I do want to kind of build a more sustainable squad. I want to very much put my own stamp on this team, getting a lot of younger players. Obviously, it's going to be a big transition this year into the Championship, and it's certainly one I'm looking forward to getting into. So anyway, hopefully that sets the scenes a little bit. What you can see in front of you now is my squad come the end of the season. And well, probably the most obvious issue here is the fact that Icardi got 11 goals, Diego Costa got 5. And yeah, we just didn't score enough goals in the Premier League. The bottom line really is that in finishing 18th, you know, it came down to the fact that the team really struggled with their goal difference. If we just look at it here, you can see 41 goals scored in 38 games, simply put, isn't good enough for a team. And well, despite, you know, 2 different managers coming in and trying 2 very different styles of play, the bottom line is it just really hasn't worked for the side this year. If we just look at this Liverpool game, you can see here the formation. I have had a bit of a look just to see where it did go wrong here at Chelsea. Conte ended up playing a 5-4-1 with just Diego Costa up top on his own in a very, very defensive formation. To be fair, Chelsea did score 2 goals in this game, but the fact they conceded 5 is really the problem. And well, this system, it just leaves the striker so alienated. I don't know what they were expecting to do. And then when Bielsa took over and took charge, if we just have a look at kind of a more recent game, you can see he had a similar problem where he was playing a 4-2-1-2-1, kind of a 4-3-3, but with 2 defensive midfielders. And the bottom line is, in the final third, they only really ever had 3 or 4 players making their way in there. You can see in this game, they ended up losing 3-1. Another issue was the fact that Eden Hazard did get injured for a long spell this year. He broke his leg, as you can see, and was out for 5 months, which is a pretty severe injury. But really, the issue here is that formation-wise, Chelsea just didn't play a very good system for attacking football. I guess that was largely down to just how poor their form was. Players just didn't perform either. You can see, looking at the average ratings, a few players edging above a 7.0, but a lot of these players who played a handful of games, really. You got players like Oscar, Todd Kane even here, who only made 4 appearances, he really struggled. I think another issue I'm going to have here is just how old the squad is and how much the squad is on. You've got a lot of players in their late 20s, and they're going to be players who are going to be wanting to play in the Premier League, wanting to play European football. And when you look at their wages here, they're going to be pretty big for the Championship. And in order to hopefully help the club out financially, keep morale high, I'm probably going to have to do a complete rebuild here. Part of me kind of wants to hold on to players like Eden Hazard, just as a priority. Perhaps Icardi, again, would be a very good player to keep hold of. But, I got a news item that you can see here. There's so many players wanting to leave the club when it comes to bouncing back next year. Morale is going to be an important factor. I do want to keep the squad harmony high. I do think it's worth noting that with this Chelsea squad, the reserve team, obviously, it's very stacked. There's lots of championship-ready players here, which is kind of nice in some ways. There's a lot of players who really just have never been given a chance at Chelsea in real life, players who have been on loan for years now in the real world of football, who we may well be able to give opportunities to. I'm looking at the likes of Charlie Masonda, Bertrand Traore, players like Nathan Ake as well, who are still at the club. He's a very good left-back. He would be a fantastic player for us next year, and he's the kind of player who we may well have to bed into the team next year. I mean, looking at the prospects, you've got a few players here like Charlie Masonda, who I already alluded to, a very good championship player, and it may well be in my interest not to sign so many players and instead to look at the best youth prospects and best players in the reserves and potentially nurture them into first-team players. And, a year in the Championship will give me a chance to give these younger players opportunities to develop, opportunities to play regular first-team football for Chelsea FC. And, it certainly is tempting. In terms of the club finances, you can see here £23 million is our budget. We're committed to spending £3.1 million a week on wages. That's ludicrous. I think the average for a Championship club might be 200,000. Realistically, I want to at least half that. If we are anything above probably 1.8 million a week, we're going to be in a financial issue going forward. So really, there's got to be players who move on. I mean, you look at the kind of squad here, there's players like Hazard, Icardi, who are on over £200,000 a week. Players like Cesc Fabregas, 30 years old. Realistically, our first year in the Premier League, he's going to be 32 by that time. He probably isn't going to be that useful for us, and certainly not a £200,000 player for a newly promoted side. So it's kind of in my interest to potentially move him on if possible. I would, in an ideal world, like to keep a few of the better younger players. I'm looking at players like Icardi, I've already mentioned. Zuma would be a good player to keep hold of. Players like Chalobah and Loftus-Cheek, ideal players for the Championship, and I'm sure I can get some football out of them. But the reality is here is that there's going to be a lot of players kicking up a fuss next year. Their wages are a massive problem. Some of them are a little bit too old, and it's going to be a rebuild, I think. This is going to be a very, very long kind of off-season. It's going to be something where I have to really evaluate the squad, evaluate what our needs are. Looking at the kind of team report here, you can see we've had a lot of goals and assists come from in the penalty area. We've only scored 41 goals the year. We've conceded 61. 58% of headers being won. It's just not really good enough. Icardi's our top goal scorer, and he's only the 17th highest goal scorer in the competition. Our most vulnerable system to play is a 4-2-3-1 wide, which is one of the most common formations seen in the Premier League. In terms of kind of comparisons here, you can see the squad's average age is 25, which is fairly young, but that is largely made up of a lot of younger players in the reserves. Elsewhere, obviously, wages £78,000 a week. Our average wage, a ludicrous amount. We've got to change that really, and it's going to be. I've said and I'll say it again, a massive, monumental task really to rebuild things here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and play through the summer. It's going to take me a very long time. I'm going to come to you guys later on in this episode. We're going to look at our transfer business, how I think we're going to shape up. I don't think we'll do our first match in charge this episode just because of the intro, because of how much I'm going to have to do and explain in just a second. But hopefully you guys enjoy the premise of the series. Hopefully I've set things out for you. I think long-term goals, be a big English side is obviously the big aim, to try and win the Champions League. To try and build a young English side as well would be a nice thing, to try and nurture some of the talent that has very much been left hung out to dry at Chelsea for a number of years in real world football. But anyway, guys, I will see you guys in about 2 months' time. Massive task ahead of me. It's going to take me a little while. Hopefully you guys stick around, and yeah, hopefully we have a reasonably good summer transfer window. Okay, guys, so we are back here. It's been one hell of a 2 months. It's been unbelievably hectic, and the rebuild is well underway. In fact, it may well even be done. I don't want to say it's done yet, but we have had to do a lot of transfer dealings. We'll start by looking at the outs. Rather than introduce all the new signings, because there's so many, I'm instead going to run you down our first team for the coming year, because there are a lot of players I'm sure you won't be familiar with who are already at Chelsea in their reserves, who definitely deserve their own little welcome. Anyway, I don't want to spend too long going through these transfers out. just because I know that you guys are fairly familiar with a lot of these players. They are big, well-known footballers within the world of football, and we've received very, very good fees for them. For the most part, of course, with us getting relegated last year, these players didn't have very good years. It wasn't necessarily easy to sell them for above their asking price. I did my best in a lot of ways. The big deal really, Eden Hazard leaving us for £80 million, a massive fee received. Originally a player I didn't really want to sell, but with that kind of money, considering he was out with a broken leg, considering he was on £200,000 a week, and also considering the fact he just wasn't very happy, it was fairly logical to move him on. It's a similar story with a lot of these players, really. It came down to the fact they were unhappy, they were kicking up a fuss, and I felt like the money that we were receiving for most of these players was relatively fair, and I should be able to reinvest that adequately to get us hopefully back where we belong in the not too distant future. Courtois left for £40 million again to PSG. N'Golo Kante, of course, signed for Chelsea for £32 million, moved on just 1 year later for £40 million, so a nice little bit of profit there. Icardi, a player I was really determined to keep hold of for a long period of time. You can see, looking at the transfer dates for a lot of these, players leaving towards the start of June. I managed to hold on to Icardi all the way until July, but it started to get too much of an issue just how much he wanted to leave for European football. Dortmund came in, £37.5 million, I had to accept it. Another player going to Man City, Aspilicueta, of course going with N'Golo Kante there, £35 million for him. David Luiz returned to French football, going to AS Monaco for £30 million. Diego Costa, £32.5 million received for him. I think that's a pretty good fee when you consider the fact he only scored 5 goals in the entirety of last year. Hopefully he doesn't perform too well for PSG, otherwise I might regret that one a little bit. A few other players who I managed to get rid of. Matic, £22.5 million to Madrid. Again, the big kind of driving force behind these deals, unhappiness and the wages. I was really delighted to get rid of Cesc Fabregas. I know he is a very good player, but at 30 years old, being on £200,000 a week and being valued at, well, £22 million, I wasn't sure if we were going to get anywhere near that. Fortunately for me, however, AS Monaco came in with a £22 million bid. It's a fairly good deal, I think, as far as we're concerned, when you consider the fact he was in his 30s, he was the third highest earner at the club, and I was concerned we might not be able to shift him on. Oscar left for £14 million to go to Everton. Pedro went to Lyon for £12 million. Christian Atsu to Angers for £7.25 million. And a few other sales here. Players like Baba Rahman and Loic Remy. Perhaps players I would have liked to have kept hold of in an ideal scenario. But the real driving force and the reason I had to let them go was the fact I think Rahman was on £80 million a week and Remy wasn't too far off that either. Anyway, a few other players like Bamford and Begovic going out. Moses and Obi Mikel also. There's probably players you recognise there. I'm not going to go through all of them because, as I said, there was a lot of players who went out. Another one who went out, definitely one worth talking about, John Terry. Decided to let him go. He's now retired. He was past it, simply put. He probably wasn't going to start for us, and I felt like it was time to just move him on. So anyway, we may well re-sign him as a staff member. Looking at the transfers in, I'll quickly cover the big ones. I'm not going to go through all of these. There's a big three, really, and that was Kelechi Iheanacho, Jordan Ibe, and Martin Odegaard. Iheanacho joins us, of course. If you watched my Lewis FC save back on FM14 before this guy was well known, he was an outstanding player for us then. This year in Football Manager, he's a really, really good player. I was delighted to sign him in. £32.5 million paid is a hell of a lot for a championship club. However, given the fact we did receive £400 million in sales this year, it kind of made sense to reinvest it. And I know actually for a fact there's going to be people who write in the comments about the fact I did receive £400 million in sales and obviously spent, you can see in the bottom left, £200 million. The reason I took this save on really was because I thought it would be a massive rebuilding kind of situation, I guess, to get involved in. I thought it was quite different. It should be exciting for you guys to see how some of these younger players develop. I feel like it's worth me stressing at this point, Football Manager's a game, you can play it how you want. I did almost buy Rashford for £60 million, but I decided that would probably annoy people, so I didn't do that one. But yeah, I spent a fair bit of money. I feel like this, as a situation on a whole, is just, it's very difficult to know exactly how this would play out. Of course, Newcastle United had the enormity, I guess, of being relegated a few years ago. They actually kept hold of a few of their good players. Of course, they got relegated last year, but in-game it was a few years ago. This is like that on a completely kind of whole nother scale because these players who I had wanted to play European football. Anyway, the few of the other big players we brought in, Jordan Ibe, I signed from relegated Bournemouth. He is a very good player, obviously, out on either wing, and it's good to have young English players in our rank. And the other big player who I mentioned, Martin Odegaard, signed from Real Madrid for his release fee, £17.5 million paid. Good little deal for him. He was on loan last year at Premier League Middlesbrough. Really didn't set the world alight there. I'm hoping he can have a significantly better time at us this year. So anyway, those are kind of the big three signings. But in terms of our squad as a whole, it's received an entire overhaul. What you see here is what I actually consider to be my best 11 and kind of subs. I'm not going to go through all of these players in this episode because this episode already has been fairly long. What I'm instead going to do is roll you through my kind of starting 11 and subs. And then hopefully over the next few episodes, you'll start to become more familiar with the squad as a whole. Of course, next episode will be our first ever game against Huddersfield. So that is something to look forward to. So in terms of our system for today's kind of season, the big aim really is to kind of continue with what worked at Spurs. I feel like the 4-2-3-1 that we had going was a very good system, and it fitted the players at Spurs fairly well, and I feel like it can fit our squad fairly well as well. So anyway, looking at the back, we picked up Rajkovic, the Serbian goalkeeper, a player who's been very good for the last few iterations of Football Manager. There was a few big reasons for really getting him in. Number one, fantastic goalkeeper, and he's got a lot of potential to grow into. Number two, very good mentals and good leadership as well. With us having a younger squad, that was something I did want to make sure we kept some of in the side. And 14 leadership, 15 determination. They're fairly reasonable for a player at the championship level who will hopefully be helping the squad. He is in fact our vice-captain. Anyway, at left back, a player who was already at Chelsea, Nathan Ake, a player who's had a few loans in real world football to Premier League sides. Last year he was on loan at Bournemouth in game, and he comes back to us now and is, I think, ready for Championship football. 22 years old, a very talented Dutch player with a lot of international football at youth level, and hopefully he can really step up to the plate now. At centre-back, we picked up Rob Holding from Arsenal, of course. A known player, he came to Arsenal from Bolton. He's a very good player in Football Manager, very good technically. He's 12 passing and 13 vision. I really like, of course. With this 4-2-3-1 system I play, I like to have defenders who can play the ball around at the back, so he fitted that well. And of course, he really fits one of the big philosophies and one of the big kind of issues that I want to address with Chelsea, and that is that I want to build a sustainable squad, but also, if possible, have an English core to it. And I believe in our first team of 27 players, 12 of them are English, which is a pretty good turnaround compared to last year when I think there was less than 5. So yeah, Rob Holding at centre-back, and alongside him, one of the few players I actually managed to keep hold of from the Chelsea first team. He's still unhappy, but I want to keep him because I think he's a player who I can really build around. He is going to be club captain for this year as well. It's Kurt Zouma, the Frenchman, 22 years old, an outstanding centre-back. He's got 4 years left on his deal. He is one of the big earners at the club at £82 million, and I did have a few bids from the likes of Manchester United for him. I'm hoping he can have a really, really good breakthrough season for us. Of course, he's a great Premier League footballer now, and I think he can be a player who's going to be just a rock in the centre of the team to build around. Anyway, at right back, we have Dominic Iorfa. I feel like the right back position is perhaps the area of the pitch which is most up in the air at the moment, in terms of we have a fair few players who can play there who are all fairly evenly matched. Iorfa here, of course, signed from Wolverhampton Wanderers. In the end, we paid £9.5 million for him. He is, of course, a regular in the England under-21 side, however, has amazing physicals, fairly good going forward as well, 14 dribbling and 11 crossing, nothing really to be scoffed at. And I think as a fullback on support, he can be a very good player for us there. Obviously, great pace, good acceleration, good strength. Player who didn't have the best of years, to be fair, at Wolverhampton Wanderers last year in the Championship, but I feel like playing with a much stronger set of players, he can really shine. Anyway, the next player we have, a player who I've got to be honest, I'm not too familiar with. He was out on loan last year and he was already at Chelsea when I joined. It's this guy, Andreas Christiansen. He is a Danish international. You can see 21 years old. Can play centre-back. However, for us, he's going to be playing as a centre-mid on the defend duty, which is something he can very much do. Last year, he was on loan at BMG. I'm not sure which team that is. Is that? I guess it's Borussia Mönchengladbach, actually. Of course, I've not got the German real name fix on this save yet. But you can see here, he had a very good year for them last year, getting a 7.26 average rating. I'm hoping he can have a great year at centre mid for us this year. He is kicking up a fuss. He does want to move to a bigger club, but he has got a little bit of time left on his wages and his contract. And I'm hoping that we can keep him at the club and hopefully kind of foster him into a very good midfielder, alongside Will Hughes, another new signing, another young English player, regular in the under-21s. If you've played in the Championship on Football Manager, you've probably come across this guy. He's a very good player at this level of football, but he has the potential to excel, and I'm hoping that this year, and it's kind of a pattern that you'll see that is really what I'm hoping for with a lot of these players, is they're players who perhaps I wouldn't sign and consider ready-made for the Premier League, but given that this year we are going to be in the Championship for at least one season, and hopefully one season only, it provides a platform for these players to get regular first-team football and hopefully develop so that in a year's time they are ready for that Premier League football and ready to be Premier League starters, and I feel like Will Hughes is a fine example of that. Out on the left-hand side in the advanced playmaker role, we go with Charlie Musonda, a player who really had a fanfare about him a few years ago when Chelsea first picked him up. I believe they picked up both of his brothers as well as signings as part of the agreement to land Charlie as a player. He's a very good kind of creative outlet. You can see great pace, very good vision as well, 14 vision, 12 passing, good flair as well at 14, only 20 years old. Last year was on loan at, I believe, Celta Vigo, of course, the Liga BBVA licence no longer in the game. But Charlie Musonda, he had a good year last year, a player very much ready for the Championship, and you can expect to see him play out on the left-hand side as an advanced playmaker for us. He is going to be, hopefully, our Christian Eriksen. That's kind of the plan. Anyway, out on the right-hand side, we go with Jordan Ibe. Of course, I've already talked about the fact that he is a big signing for us. I think he's a very good player. I really like Jordan Ibe. I really rate him. He has good potential, as you can see here. If we look at his report as a whole, suited to Premier League football, as are a lot of our players. And this year should provide him with a great platform to really, put in some good performances, hopefully bang in a lot of goals and develop as a player. Martin Odegaard is our centre attacking mid. Unfortunately for us, he stubbed his toe. He won't be ready for the first game of the year next episode, but a very, very good player in that centre attacking midfielder role. Paid £17 million for him. His finishing perhaps and his stamina really the glaring weaknesses as far as I'm concerned. But at 18, he's such a young player, so much potential to grow into. Definitely excited to see what he can achieve at the club. And up top, we have Kelechi Iheanacho, a player who I talked about the fact I had a very good experience with him a few years ago in FM. He looks outstanding this year. I couldn't resist picking him up. And the fact he was willing to take a step down to the Championship to play regular first-team football really speaks volumes, I think, for his attitude as a player. Anyway, on the bench, a few other players we picked up worth introducing. Joe Gomez joins us from Liverpool. Another young English player, can play a variety of player positions across the back. Just a very, very nice backup player to have with a ton of potential. Jordan Amavi joined us from the Villa. Of course, a French player who had a big bit of a fanfare around him, and he had a very good start to his time at Villa back when they were in the Championship. However, he did have a few injuries of his own. He's a player with fantastic physicals, great pace, a decent player for most Premier League sides. He's going to be on the bench, can play either left back or a left attacking midfielder position. It's nice to have players who you can bring on who just have a lot of versatility about them and are very athletic, and he's certainly one of them. The next player we have, Ruben Loftus-Cheek, of course, already at Chelsea, 21 years old, an exciting prospect for the future, has a load of player traits already. I'm excited to see what he can do when given the opportunity, and you can expect a fair bit of rotation this year. Anyway, the next player we have, Joshua Onoma, the only player actually this year who I picked up from Spurs, a player who, of course, I'm familiar with given the fact that last year on this save, I was in charge of Spurs, and I didn't really talk about this earlier on in the episode, but just to address it a little bit, I know there's going to be Spurs fans who are really, really excited about the fact I was doing Spurs as my first save of the year. Unfortunately, and I'm sure most people will understand, Chelsea got relegated. I mean, I love Football Manager. I love unique challenges. I've seen other people have saves, across years where top Premier League teams get relegated at some point, and they always appeal to me as exciting challenges, and I just couldn't resist this opportunity. I know that Spurs fans are now going to hate me in the game world, which might be interested when we get promoted again. It might add a bit of spice to those games against one of our London rivals. But yeah, hopefully you guys understand, and hopefully for the majority of people will understand why I've made the switch and hopefully enjoy this equally as much as the Spurs save, if not more. But anyway, Josh Onoma, picked up from Spurs, a very good kind of midfielder, can play as a box-to-box role, will get a lot of first-team football for us. You can see not a lot of cons about him. Well-suited to Championship football, very determined, a very athletic player, a player we can bring on with not long left, and he can really add, another gear in our midfield. Anyway, the next player we have, Cerny. I believe that's how we'd say his name. He's from Ajax. Of course, if I'm completely wrong, please let me know. I know I have Czech viewers. You will tell me very bluntly if I'm saying any of these names wrong. We signed him for £8.5 million. You'll notice with a lot of these transfers, we spent £200 million in total in the window, which I know is a lot of money. We did, however, sell £400 million worth of players and half our wage budget, so I feel like it's kind of swings and roundabouts in that regard. I really have tried to reinvest the money that we picked up to get a team that is built for a long, sustainable future. So Cerny comes in, alongside him Kennedy, of course, a player who Chelsea did pick up a few years ago now. I believe it's from Fluminense in Brazil. Last year he was on loan at Watford. Didn't play particularly well in the Championship, but in the Premier League. But he strikes me as a player who's very, very kind of talented, can develop. He's a bit of a jack of all trades, master of none. There's no attributes that really stand out for me, and the fact he can play just such a variety of positions is kind of nice to have in a player on the bench. But at the same time, I don't really have a plan for him in the future. He's an interesting one. I feel like he may develop into an incredible player. He might just become one of those players who we kind of just take a little bit for granted. Anyway, the last player we have, Michy Batshuayi. Someone's going to tell me I've said his name wrong. I might just call him Michy for the benefit of kind of talking. I feel like his last name, a little bit of a mouthful, Batshuayi. It's probably not even how you say it. Someone will tell me if I'm wrong. But 23 years old, a Belgium international, a very good player, signed for £34 million last year, wasn't given any first-team opportunities during his time at Chelsea last year, because Chelsea for the most part played a one-up top system with Diego Costa or Icardi, neither of who was scoring that much. But he is going to get an opportunity here. Kelechi Iheanacho I do have considered as our starting striker, but it's worth noting that with Kelechi I am training him currently to play as a right attacking mid, as an inside forward, potentially cutting in. So anyway, that's kind of an introduction to some of the big players in our squad. It's going to take a little while, I'm sure, for you guys to get familiar with them all. As I said, initially, we are going to be very much playing to the 4-2-3-1 system. I've tried to sign players to fit that system. Beyond kind of the players I talked about, there are players who were already at Chelsea here. Players like Thomas Callas, Nathan Chalobah, Bertrand Traore, Tammy Abraham. I know I play with a big fanfare about him. There's a few other players here who I've not talked about, who you may well recognise. I'm sure you'll get to know them as time goes by. And there are some other players in the kind of under-23s. I did talk about all the sales. A few players who I actually loaned out. Willian, I couldn't get a move for him, so I loaned him out to Manchester United for the year. They're going to be paying half of his wages, which I think is fairly reasonable. I tried to sell him. I went as low as £10 million for him. No one wanted him because of his wages. So in the end, to get Manchester United to pay half of them for the year is fairly good. Looking at the kind of under-23s, there's players like Trevor Chalobah. We picked up Reece Oxford from West Ham, a player who I was eyeing up during my time at Spurs. I was delighted to sign him here for Chelsea. His physicals and his pace let him down a little bit, but he's only 18 years old. Of course, a player who shot into the footballing limelight just a few years ago, really, when he played for Arsenal, or against Arsenal, aged only 16. But anyway, guys, that's kind of an overview here. Just a quick look at the team report. It's probably not worth talking about the goals against, because that's from last year. There is a little bit of a leadership void in the squad, but that's kind of to be expected with such a young team. We apparently have a low level of aggression, but with the exception of that, there's not a lot of weaknesses here. You know, we've got a lot of talented youngsters. We've got good backup in a variety of positions. We have one of the best coaching setups. We have one of the best scouting setups. One thing that's perhaps worth noting is that I was able to keep hold of a lot of our staff members this year, which was really good. A lot of them didn't leave with either manager departing throughout last season, and they've decided to slog it out with me in the Championship this year. So that made kind of my takeover just a little bit easier. Anyway, we have good decision makers, very good physically, great first touch, good creativity. And you can see assist coming from the left side of the pitch. Not valid, but we do have very creative players nevertheless. Defensive players in kind of the left-back position with players like Nathan Ake. We have just a really impressive depth to the squad. And our transfer budget, I didn't really talk about this. I don't intend to spend that much more of it. But we do have £126 million left over in the transfer budget, and £100 million left over in the balance. And our wage budget has a load of money left over too. I don't intend to spend that much of it. You can see our committed spend for this year is just shy of £1.6 million, which would be perhaps a top half Premier League team wage budget. It might be slightly more than that actually now, given the fact that in real world football there's a little bit more money floating around. So it has pretty much been halved since last season over the summer, which I think was an important thing to get done, because this year I do expect us to make a fair bit of a loss with the void, I guess, that's been left by the lack of Premier League money. But anyway, that's kind of a general intro to this series and to this team. A little bit of a longer episode. I wanted to keep it shorter. I've kind of failed, but I felt like there's a lot to get through, a lot to talk about in terms of my thought kind of process, I guess. Let me know what you make of this series, what you make of this challenge down in the comments. Definitely a long-term challenge, this one. I want to win the Champions League with this team. I want to build, if possible, a young English side for the most part. And you can see a majority of our team is young English players, which is always good. Of course, Brexit is in Football Manager. I'd be a liar if I was to say I don't kind of want a hard Brexit, whereby, and if you don't know about Brexit, basically, obviously, it's a political situation and movement going on in England at the moment, where we're waiting for a certain article to be triggered. In Football Manager, there's a load of different results as kind of to what can happen. One of them is that each English side in the Premier League can only have 4 non-British players. If that happened, I'd kind of like it in this save. It'd make it a very interesting scenario. Either way, that's years ahead. It can only happen 2 to 10 years into a save. But I don't know. In an ideal situation, I'm planning for that eventuality should it happen. But anyway, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this first episode. Hopefully you enjoyed the intro at the start. A lot of effort went into that. If you have enjoyed and obviously watched until this point, please do smash the like button. If you've got any comments, leave them down below. And other than that, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you're going to enjoy this series, Rebuilding Chelsea. And I will see you guys in the next one. I'm out.